I've been working on that new headline, Mr. Corbin. I think I finally got it.
Excellent. Let's hear it.
Trident, carrying the scepter of quality.
Good. Very good, in fact. But there's just one problem. A trident is not a scepter.
I mean, it's close enough.
Close enough? Close enough? Take some pride in your work. We are Trident Luxury Lines. We do not get by on close enough. Start over.
Yes, sir.
It was never the grief, the political collapse, or even the impossible scale of moving humanity across star systems that unsettled me. Those problems were visible, understandable at least. But the years after Earth's evacuation carried a quieter kind of unease, something harder to define. Humanity had scattered across distances so vast that even the meaning of distance itself had changed. Those terrors are well documented. They have their monuments and their histories and their official commemorations. The wrongness, is more subtle than any of that, more specific, and it has taken a long time to put language to it. Humanity was handed the most clarifying moment in its history. The homeworld was dying, not by invasion, not by war, not by any catastrophe that could be attributed to a clear enemy and then avenged or mourned in the familiar way. Earth was dying because the atmosphere had been destabilized past the point of correction, a consequence, in part, of the grav drive technology that had simultaneously saved the species by making the stars reachable and made the surface below increasingly, catastrophically unlivable. By 2150, the announcement had been made. By 2203, it was final. The world that humanity had named itself after, that it had organized its entire existence around for the whole length of recorded history, was gone. Not in an explosion, not stolen, just slowly, methodically finished. You would expect that facing this kind of loss, we would emerge leaner, quieter, stripped of pretension by the sheer scale of what had happened. That a species forced to abandon its own world would look at the new ones. Jemison in Alpha Centauri, Gagarin in Sol's outer reach, the wind-scoured surface of Aquila, and decide to begin differently. To build a civilization that prioritized what catastrophe had revealed to be actually important, rather than reproducing the status hierarchies and luxury industries of the world it had just finished losing. We did not do that. Somewhere in the difficult, fractious decades following Earth's evacuation, decades during which the United Colonies was founded in 2159 and New Atlantis was established on Jemison in 2160 and designated the Settled Systems Administrative Capital in 2161. Someone decided the new frontier needed a luxury cruise liner, not a colony ship, not a medical transport, not a scientific survey vessel or a search and rescue platform or any of the things that a species rebuilding from near extinction might reasonably have prioritized. A cruise liner, a ship whose sole operational purpose is to carry people who already have more than they need somewhere comfortable so they can feel more comfortable than they already do. That ship is the Siren of the stars, and the company that built her, Trident Luxury Lines, has been moving quietly through the settled systems ever since, offering an experience of interstellar travel that bears no meaningful resemblance to what interstellar travel actually looks like for most people who have to do it. The simple reading of this is contempt. It is easy, and not entirely wrong, to look at the Siren of the stars and recognize it immediately as what it appears to be: a class system replicating itself in the void, the wealthy locating new insulation, new distance, new expensive ways to ensure that the conditions experienced by everyone else remain invisible to them. That reading is not wrong, but it is insufficient, because the Siren of the stars is not simply a monument to excess. She is something stranger and more revealing, a mirror held up to a species in the process of deciding who it wants to be out here in the dark, and showing it the face it apparently cannot stop making. The question the Siren has always been asking, not in any brochure, not in any Trident marketing communication, but simply by existing and continuing to operate, is not whether humanity can survive catastrophe. We know it can. The settled systems are proof of that at every scale. The question is, what kind of humanity survives? What survives intact from the old world? What gets rebuilt first? What gets left behind? And what turns out to be so fundamental to what we are that we carry it through the vacuum without even noticing the weight? The answer, so far, appears to be that the impulse toward luxury, toward status display, toward the creation of legible distance between those who have and those who have considerably less, made the crossing without difficulty. It packed light. It adapted immediately to the new context. It was operating again before many colony settlements had running water. And that is not a simple thing to look at directly, because it is not only an indictment of the wealthy, it is a description of the species. It describes something that appears fundamental enough that the loss of an entire world was not sufficient to interrupt it for more than a generation. The Siren of the stars is where this becomes most visible, the place where the impulse is most concentrated, most undefended, most legible as what it actually is. And the question she raises, quietly, as she moves through the dark, is not why people want luxury. It is what the wanting reveals, not just about her passengers, about what it means to be human in the settled systems, and what it might mean that the thing we could not bring ourselves to leave behind was the need to demonstrate that some of us matter more than the rest. There is a version of this story that presents itself as reassuring. Humanity survived. It crossed the void. It built cities on worlds that had never seen a human face, and made them livable, and then, eventually, made them home. That is a remarkable thing, and it deserves to be said plainly. The founding of New Atlantis, the development of Alpha Centauri, the slow, difficult work of establishing functional societies across the Sol system and beyond, none of this was inevitable. It required the kind of sustained collective effort that no single civilization in Earth's history had ever been called upon to make under the same conditions of urgency and displacement. But the reassuring version of the story stops there. It does not follow the question to its next logical step. And then what? What did humanity build once it had secured its survival? What did it choose once choice became possible again? The Siren of the stars is one answer to that question, and it is one of the less comfortable answers available. It suggests that the very first thing humanity did with its surplus once survival had been managed and resources had begun to accumulate, was reproduce with remarkable fidelity the social hierarchies it had carried with it across the void. That the architecture of who matters and how much, which seemed like it might not survived the crossing better than almost anything else. Trident Luxury Lines did not emerge from desperation the way most things in the settled systems did. Most of what was built in the early centuries of interstellar colonization was built out of necessity. Cydonia carved into the Martian rock because the mineral extraction it enabled was critical to the colonial economy. New Homestead established in Saturn's orbit to support the processing infrastructure the Sol system required. Gagarin Landing built on Gagarin to maintain human presence on a world that needed settlement before it was ready for it. These places were built because they had to be. Their harshness was not a design flaw. It was the point. What we can infer about Trident's origins, based on what the company has become, is that it was not built out of desperation. The logic of what Trident is, a corporation that offers premium interstellar vacation packages and maintains its own fleet of custom-built passenger liners, with a dedicated star yard orbiting Aquila in the Cheyenne system, points toward a founding philosophy rooted in surplus rather than survival. Surplus capital, surplus ambition, and a particular kind of foresight that does not see a frontier primarily as a hardship to endure, but as an opportunity. Specifically, the opportunity to define the terms of comfort before the broader culture has time to establish what ordinary comfort looks like. In a new civilization, the highest tier of luxury tends to be established early by the people with the resources to establish it, and everything below that tier is then defined in relation to it. Whether Trident got there first or simply arrived at precisely the right moment, the result is the same. They have defined the upper limit. What makes their existence historically striking is the timeline it implies. Victor Isa's development of the grav drive in 2138 made interstellar travel possible. Within roughly a decade, that technology was being deployed in the service of mass colonization. The desperate, massive, largely improvised project of getting enough of humanity off a dying world to ensure the species survived. The early colony ships were not luxury vessels. They were utilitarian in the extreme. People brought what they could carry and traveled in conditions that prioritized survival over comfort in every parameter that could be measured. And yet, at some point after those first crossings, the precise moment lost to the kind of corporate history that luxury brands tend not to publicize, someone had already identified the opportunity for a different kind of interstellar travel. Not for survival, for enjoyment. The gap between the colony ship and the Siren of the stars is not, in historical terms, especially large. The same technology that saved humanity was, within a relatively compressed timeline, being used to sell humanity a premium version of itself. This is worth pausing on because it changes what Trident represents. The Siren of the stars is not a product of a civilization that has solved its problems and turned its attention to pleasure. The settled systems in the centuries following Earth's evacuation were far from secure. The colony war between the United Colonies and the Free Star Collective, which ran from 2308 to 2311, ending with the Free Star victory at the Battle of Cheyenne, made clear that political and military conflict had traveled to the stars along with everything else. Conditions across many colonial settlements remained genuinely difficult. The gap between the founding idealism of a new civilization and the lived reality of most people within it was, and in many places remains, significant. Trident operated in that context, not after it was resolved, during it. This is what makes their business logic genuinely interesting to examine. Because what Trident understood, what the existence of the Siren proves they understood, is that luxury in an unstable environment is not a harder sell than luxury in a stable one. In some ways, it is an easier one. When the world feels uncertain, when the political and physical environment seems to shift under every institution that tries to plant its roots, the people with resources are often more motivated to spend them on insulation, on experiences that actively exclude the uncertainty from reaching them. The Siren of the stars did not become possible because the settled systems became safe. She became possible because enough people with enough capital decided that safety, the experiential kind, the felt kind, the kind that cannot actually be purchased but can be very convincingly simulated, was exactly what they wanted to buy. What Trident sells, at its core, is not travel. It is certainty. The Siren is a vessel where nothing is unpredictable, where the environment is managed to prevent surprise, where the service is calibrated to anticipate your needs before you feel them, where the turbulence of the settled system's broader political and economic life is not merely absent, but actively, deliberately excluded from the passenger experience. In the 23rd century and beyond, that is not a small thing to offer. The settled systems have produced remarkable achievements. New Atlantis as a genuine cosmopolitan center, the UC Vanguard as a functional defense force, the Free Star Rangers as an expression of a different but equally serious civic tradition. But they have not produced stability in any comprehensive sense. War, crime, corporate conflict, frontier lawlessness. These are not historical problems that the settled systems resolved and moved past. They are ongoing features of life at the edge of human expansion. Against that backdrop, the Siren represents something that is, in its way, almost utopian. A small, mobile, privately maintained world where the problems simply do not reach you, where the question of how to navigate a universe full of competing factions and uncertain loyalties is replaced, for the duration of the voyage, by the far simpler question of what you would like for dinner. The genius of Trident Luxury Lines is not the quality of their furnishings or the caliber of their cuisine, though both are exceptional. It is that they identified, in the chaotic early centuries of the settled systems, a need so fundamental to a certain kind of wealthy consciousness that it would survive every political upheaval the new era produced. The need to feel, at least temporarily, that the world has been made orderly on your behalf, that someone, somewhere, has arranged things such that you need not worry. The Siren does not just sail between star systems. She maintains, for her passengers, the sustained experience of living in a civilization that works, smoothly, elegantly, without friction, even when the civilization outside her hull is doing none of those things. Step aboard the Siren of the stars, and the first thing you notice is what you do not notice. You do not notice the hum of the engines, even though you are moving faster than anything humanity once imagined possible. You do not notice the recycled air, even though the atmosphere you are breathing is machine-maintained and technically artificial, filtered and reconstituted by systems running continuously behind walls you will never see. You do not notice the void pressing against the hull, the absolute, lightless, temperature beyond temperature darkness that is, at all times, a matter of centimeters away from everything aboard this ship. This absence of noticing is the engineering achievement Trident is most proud of, and it is not structural in any conventional sense. It is perceptual. The Siren of the stars has been designed, in every detail, from the acoustic dampening of its corridors to the spectral calibration of its interior lighting, to prevent you from feeling where you actually are, which is to say, in deep space, in a metal vessel crossing the distances between stars, in conditions that, stripped of the ship's careful and continuous maintenance, would be immediately and completely lethal. Instead, you feel something like the interior of an exceptionally fine residence. The materials are real and sourced with deliberate intention, not simulated wood grain or artificial stone, but actual timber and actual mineral surface brought from colonies across multiple systems at a logistical cost that is itself a kind of luxury signal. The staffing ratio is maintained at a level that keeps service feeling almost anticipatory, not a matter of asking, but of receiving, the thing arriving before the desire for it has fully formed. This is not accident. It is the product of training philosophies and operational standards that take the concept of invisible service seriously in a way that most hospitality contexts cannot sustain. The dining aboard the Siren deserves particular attention because it is, in some ways, the clearest expression of what Trident is actually selling beneath the surface of every other offering. The ingredients in the Siren's kitchens are sourced from across the settled systems, not because this diversity is strictly necessary for the production of good food, but because the supply chain required to maintain it at interstellar scale is itself a demonstration of organizational reach. The menu is not simply food, it is evidence. Evidence that someone controls a network capable of producing this menu reliably at this remove from everything. And control of that kind of network is, in the current era of the settled systems, a form of power that few institutions can match. Dinner on the Siren is, among other things, a daily reminder that power, when it has been converted successfully into pleasure, is the most comfortable version of itself. Beyond the dining, the Siren offers something that might be called a social architecture, an environment designed not just to accommodate wealthy passengers, but to facilitate a particular kind of interaction among them. The common areas are sized and arranged to produce small, natural groupings rather than anonymous crowds. The lounges do not swallow their inhabitants. The observation areas create a context for shared experience. Two people standing before the same viewport, in the same quiet, in the same light, with the same stars outside. That dissolves certain kinds of professional distance more efficiently than any formal setting could. This is not incidental to the Siren's function. It is, in many ways, central to it. The passenger manifest of a Siren departure is likely to contain people whose paths would not ordinarily converge in quite this concentrated way. Executives from competing organizations, political figures from different factions within the UC or Freestar systems, individuals whose wealth derives from sources that benefit from a degree of professional distance. The ship brings them together in close quarters in a context calibrated to lower defenses and encourage the kind of candid conversation that does not happen in offices or at formal functions. What emerges from this, almost inevitably, is a quality of networking that is impossible to replicate in any fixed venue. The Siren is not merely a location for relaxation. She is a venue for relationship building among people for whom relationships are capital. The conversation after dinner, the shared moment at the viewport on a quiet evening, these are not incidental to the Siren's value proposition. For many of her passengers, they are the primary one. The observation areas are worth sitting with for a moment longer because they represent the most honest aspect of the Siren's design, the one place where the ship does not pretend the void is not there. The large viewports are positioned with an aesthetic care that is unmistakably intentional. The experience of standing before them is designed to produce a specific emotional register, something close to awe, but awe that has been made safe. The universe from these windows is not threatening, it is panoramic. The same void that consumed Earth's atmosphere, that made every early colonist feel the full weight of their own smallness. This void, filtered through Trident's framing, becomes something close to beautiful. This is a profound inversion. For the people who made the early crossings, who traveled in ships with none of the Siren's insulation, who understood viscerally that the universe was not friendly, and that their survival was genuinely contingent on 100 factors they could not fully control. The stars represented something to be navigated and survived. For the Siren's passengers, filtered through centuries of successful colonization and the specific comfort of a well-maintained hull, those same stars have become something to be appreciated. The threat has been converted into aesthetics. The terror has been domesticated into decor. The social heart of the ship is the Starview Ballroom, the main gathering space where gala events take place, and the curated world the Siren has been designed to produce becomes most fully visible. And it is here at the center of the most exclusive venue in the settled systems that an organization called the Terran Preservation Society holds its ceremonies. The Society's stated purpose is to keep Earth's old traditions alive, its cultural practices, its inherited aesthetic forms, its social rituals. The name is earnest in a way that is almost disarming. These are people who genuinely care about what was lost when Earth became uninhabitable, and what the Society has built around that care is an annual award ceremony aboard the Siren. The Earth Savior Award, a piece made of precious jewels and metals, beautiful in proportion to its subject. The award itself circulates, presented at one ceremony, returned before the next, never permanently owned, always moving through the settled systems as the center of an occasion. What you are looking at when you look at this ceremony is something the Siren makes uniquely possible: grief converted into aesthetics. The people gathered in the Starview Ballroom to honor Earth's memory are not pretending to feel something they don't. The loss was real. The desire to preserve something, a tradition, a continuity, a thread connecting the present to the world that came before, is not fraudulent. But the form that desire has taken here, among people wealthy enough to book passage on the Siren, filtered through the trappings of a gala, and the grandeur of a room designed to make everything feel significant, tells you something specific about what it means to mourn a world when you have the means to mourn it beautifully. Earth's memory on the Siren of the stars has become a theme. The loss is real. The performance of the loss is expensive. And the distance between those two things is, in some sense, the entire subject of this ship. And here, the Siren's design reveals something that is worth stating plainly: the experience of genuine awe, of the universe's actual immensity, its actual strangeness, the actual improbability of being alive within it, is available in its most comfortable form only to those who can afford the insulation. The awe is real, but the version of it available on the Siren, accompanied by good wine and excellent company, and the certain knowledge that a comfortable bed awaits, is a version from which all discomfort has been removed. And the discomfort was, for the early colonists, and for anyone traveling under ordinary conditions in the settled systems today, part of the point. Fear is what makes wonder honest. Remove the fear, and you still have a view. But you have lost something, some quality of encounter with the actual universe that cannot survive the transition into a fully controlled environment. The Siren's greatest achievement and its central limitation are the same thing. She has made the universe safe to look at, and in doing so, she has made it something slightly less than what it actually is. Every luxury object is, at its core, a device for producing distance. Not simply the distance between the person who possesses it and the person who does not, though it certainly produces that. More precisely, it creates a distance between the owner's lived experience and the lived experience of most people in the same society. A different relationship to difficulty, a different texture to daily life, a different way of moving through a world that presents most people with friction and presents you with something close to ease. The Siren of the stars produces this distance in a particularly vivid way because she moves. She does not sit behind a security gate in New Atlantis' wealthiest district, insulated but stationary. She travels. She passes through the same star systems that contain some of the most difficult conditions of life in the settled systems, and she passes through them offering an experience that is designed to make those conditions invisible to everyone aboard her. Cydonia on Mars is perhaps the clearest contrast. The settlement cut into the Martian rock exists because the resource extraction it enables is critical, not because it is a pleasant place to live. The workers who descend into Cydonia's tunnels do so in conditions that are functional but not comfortable. The work is extraction in the plainest sense. Physical, repetitive, operating at the margins of what the environment will allow. The community built around it reflects the economics of extraction faithfully, a settlement that exists to serve a function and provides its inhabitants with enough to keep them functional in turn. The people of Cydonia are not suffering in any dramatic sense, but the gap between their daily reality and the reality of a Siren passenger is not, in any meaningful way, a matter of degree. It is a matter of kind. Aquila City, The capital of the Freestar Collective on Aquila itself offers a different but equally instructive contrast. The Freestar Collective was founded in 2189 by Solomon Coe through a voluntary alliance with Volii, a political project explicitly oriented against the hierarchical model of the United Colonies. Aquila City reflects this in its built environment, the walls against Aquila's native predators, the culture of self-sufficiency, the pride in individual capacity that is real and deeply held. The Freestar tradition genuinely values something different from what the UC's institutional prestige rewards. But even here, within a political tradition that explicitly rejects the UC's model of centralized hierarchy, the gradient of wealth is legible. The established ranch versus the new arrival's claim, the respected name versus the unknown one. Status takes different forms in different systems, but it takes form, inevitably, everywhere. In Neon on Volii Alpha, the contrast with the Siren becomes more complicated. Neon offers pleasure. It was built for pleasure, specifically organized around the legal commerce of Aurora and the entertainment culture that emerged around it. But it is a different register of pleasure. Neon's offerings are available at street level to anyone with enough credits for an evening in a city that distinguishes between its clients primarily by what they can spend in a given night. The Siren's pleasures are available only to those who can afford passage, and what that threshold represents in practical terms is a standard of wealth that most people in the settled systems, including most people who can afford a comfortable evening in Neon, cannot sustain. What is particularly striking is the spatial relationship between the Siren and all of this. She passes through the same systems. She moves through the same universe that contains Sidonia's tunnels and Aquila's frontier and Neon's street-level transactions. And she passes through all of it without touching any of it. Her hull maintains the separation not just physically, but experientially. The mining settlement, the frontier city, the corporate pleasure district remain outside where they belong for the duration of the voyage. There is a detail about the UC's civic philosophy that is relevant here and worth naming directly. The United Colonies presents itself as a meritocratic institution, a civilization built on civic participation and structured opportunity, where what you contribute determines what you receive. The UC Vanguard embodies this. Service as the mechanism of social mobility, the idea that earned distinction is legitimate in a way that inherited wealth is not. This is a coherent political philosophy and not an empty one. But it exists alongside the Siren. It coexists with a luxury industry whose fundamental premise is that earned distinction is not, in fact, the primary currency of the elite. That accumulated capital, compounding across generations through corporate structures and investment portfolios that no single generation could have assembled from scratch, is what actually determines access to the top of the hierarchy. The UC does not resolve this contradiction. It lives inside it, as most complex societies do, with a stated ideology that emphasizes merit and civic contribution, and an actual economy that increasingly rewards those who already have the most. The Siren is not a critique of the UC's stated values. She is a product of the gap between those values and the actual structure of the society that produced them. The economic relationship between the Siren and the rest of the settled systems is not simply one of inequality. Inequality is ubiquitous in the settled systems and takes many forms that do not require a luxury liner to express. What distinguishes the Siren is the quality of insulation she provides. Her expense is largely the expense of exclusion itself. You are not primarily paying for the quality of the food, though it is good. You are paying for the guarantee that the world containing people who cannot afford these things will not, for the duration of your voyage, be part of your world. The political dimensions of this are genuinely complicated because the settled systems do not have a single authority capable of adjudicating what the Siren's existence means. The UC has its institutions, but its jurisdiction over a private luxury liner operating across multiple systems is limited by the very political architecture of the settled systems, the same fragmented sovereignty that defines the era. The Freestar Collective's political philosophy might object to the class dynamics the Siren expresses, but the Freestar tradition equally prizes freedom of economic choice, which limits how far that objection can practically extend. What this means is that the Siren occupies a zone of structural impunity that is itself a function of what she is and who she carries. The people who could change the conditions under which she operates are, to a significant degree, the people with an interest in keeping those conditions exactly as they are. This is not unusual in the settled systems. It is, in many ways, the defining feature of how power works here. But the Siren makes it unusually visible, or rather, visible only to those looking carefully from the outside, because from within, the question simply does not arise. The insulation that prevents passengers from feeling the void also prevents them from feeling the political conditions that made the Siren possible. The design is thorough in this way. It is very good at what it does. The Siren of the Stars presents herself as a sealed world, controlled, curated, elevated above the turbulence of the settled systems. But the settled systems do not respect the Siren's design intentions. They come aboard with the passengers. They travel in luggage and in histories and in the specific complicated needs of people who have not stopped being what they are simply because they purchased a ticket. Power, as a general rule, does not take vacations. It relocates. What the Siren's controlled environment actually provides, though no one at Trident would frame it this way in any official communication, is a particular quality of privacy. The specific security of being nowhere in particular, legally and spatially, while the normal world continues without you. New Atlantis has its institutions, its oversight mechanisms, the ambient awareness of who is doing what and whether it aligns with UC policy. Corporate headquarters have audit trails and legal departments and the general friction of accountability. But aboard a luxury liner moving between star systems, in a stateroom with no surveillance beyond what the passenger has consented to, at dinner with other powerful individuals who understand precisely the value of discretion, the machinery of consequence operates quite differently. Consider what this means in practice. Among those who have made their way aboard the Siren is a Gal Bank executive traveling in comfort alongside associates with whom he has been quietly funneling institutional funds into private arrangements for months. The embezzlement these individuals have arranged is elegant in its construction, possible only because each of them has cultivated the appearance of exactly the kind of respectable, credentialed professional that a Trident passenger manifest implies. One fills the role of onboard security staff, a corrupted UC security officer whose institutional affiliation provides convenient legitimacy. Another moves between staterooms with the confidence of someone who knows how to use a social occasion to gather information. The money moves, the paper trail is managed, and the Siren provides the cover without knowing she is providing it. The Siren's altitude from oversight did not create this arrangement. The embezzlement began long before anyone booked passage, but it is worth noting that the ship provides ideal conditions for the final stages of that kind of scheme to be worked out between the parties involved. Which is to say, what came aboard with these passengers is not just their luggage. It is the accumulated weight of choices that looked very different from the outside than from within. And then there is the matter of the captain. Trident's vetting process is thorough by the standards of the luxury sector. The company maintains its own star yard orbiting Aquila and builds its ships to specifications that express the same philosophy as the ships themselves. No shortcuts, no compromises, everything done to a standard that the rest of the industry cannot easily match. It would be reasonable to assume that the person entrusted to command the flagship vessel has been vetted with comparable rigor. Reasonable, but potentially insufficient. Because the thing about people who have reinvented themselves is that reinvention, done carefully, leaves very little visible trace. A captain with a past that predates his current identity, who arrived at his position with credentials that describe a man who does not quite exist, whose actual history involves a previous career with an organization that does not file paperwork with the settled system's institutional bodies, would be precisely the kind of person that a thorough vetting process is not optimally designed to find. What a background check examines is the record that has been made available. It cannot examine the record that has been carefully omitted. The pattern this implies, a commanding officer with interests and connections that diverge from Trident's stated operational priorities, using the altitude and trust of his position to facilitate activity that the passenger manifest is not supposed to contain, is one that emerges in various forms wherever the right institutional oversight is absent and the right incentives are present. On the Siren of the Stars, both conditions are arguably met, and the Crimson Fleet, whose relationship to the settled system's jurisdictional architecture has always been defined by its ability to operate in exactly the spaces that formal oversight does not reach, would find a sympathetic ear in a position like that one. What this tells us about the Siren, and this is a reading that her design resists, but her structure cannot fully prevent, is that the most controlled environment in the settled systems and the least controlled environment can share the same hull. The polished surface is real. The management is genuine. The service is everything Trident says it is. And underneath all of that, in the gaps between the official record and what actually moves through the ship, the settled systems continue to operate according to their actual logic rather than their stated one. The Siren's calm is not the calm of safety. It is the calm of a surface that has been very carefully maintained. Suppression has a tendency to express itself at precisely the moments least convenient for everyone involved. And when it does, on a ship this far from help, the controlled environment's most valued feature, its distance from the institutions of the settled systems, becomes its most dangerous one. What moves below the waterline of the Siren of the Stars is ultimately the same thing that moves below the surface of every institution the settled systems have built. The unresolved question of who gets to do what to whom, and who, if anyone, is positioned to notice. The Siren does not resolve this question. She makes it smaller, more concentrated, and considerably harder to see from the outside, which is, in the end, exactly what her passengers are paying for. Pull back from the Siren for a moment. Let her become, from sufficient distance, what she looks like in the dark. A small, lit vessel, moving through enormous space, carrying its particular cargo of human complexity through a universe that has no opinion about any of it. From that distance, the question becomes simple again. Why? Not why build a luxury ship. The economic logic of that follows readily from everything we have already examined. But why, as a species, do we continue to want what the Siren represents? Why, after losing an entire world, after surviving the colony war, after scattering ourselves across systems so distant from each other that the grav drive, Victor Isa's invention in 2138, remains one of the genuine intellectual achievements of human history after all of that disruption and loss and forced reinvention? Why do we still care viscerally about the difference between a stateroom with a viewport and a cabin without one? The biological answer is probably the most honest starting point. Status seeking is not a choice any individual makes. It is an operating feature of the kind of consciousness that evolved in social groups, where your position relative to others determined, in very literal terms, your access to the things required for survival and reproduction. A social species without a functioning status hierarchy is not, in the historical record, a happy species in some post-hierarchical paradise. It is, more often, a confused and anxious one. The impulse to locate yourself in relation to others, to know whether you are above, below, or level, and to make that position legible, appears to be built into the operating system in a way that political philosophy and planetary catastrophe have so far failed to remove. Trident Luxury Lines did not create this impulse. They identified it, understood it deeply, built infrastructure around it, and priced it at a level that ensures its expression remains legible as extreme status. That is a shrewd business model, but the impulse precedes the model by the full length of human history. The more interesting question, the one that requires the settled systems as its specific context, rather than just general human nature, is why the form the impulse takes here has reconverged so quickly and so completely on the forms familiar from Earth's most stratified periods. The early decades of the colonial era represented, at least in principle, an opportunity for genuine reset. not because human nature changes, but because new societies sometimes find new forms for old drives. The Freestar Collective's founding ideology explicitly rejects the prestige logic of centralized hierarchy, rooting itself in the frontier tradition of individual self-sufficiency rather than institutional prestige. The people who built Sidonia and New Homestead and Gagarin Landing were not, in the main, doing so in pursuit of the kind of status the Siren represents. And yet, within a compressed historical time frame, the Siren exists. The impulse toward elite luxury display, toward the extreme consumption that communicates maximum distance from ordinary life, has re-established itself as a visible feature of settled system society as thoroughly as if no crossing had been made, no world lost, no civilization reconstructed from necessity. What does this tell us about the reconstruction? One reading is the pessimistic one, that the settled systems represent not a genuinely new civilization, but an extension of the old one, with its accumulated inequities, its entrenched hierarchies, its concentration of wealth and influence in an elite whose composition shifts across generations, but whose structural position does not. The UC's careful, legalistic, institutionally sophisticated form of governance is continuous with, not a departure from, the state-building traditions of Earth's most hierarchical eras. The Siren is not evidence that something went wrong. It is evidence that something very old never stopped. But another reading is more ambivalent, and I think ultimately more honest. The people who travel on the Siren, the ones who board her not for operational reasons, not because they need the privacy or the altitude, but because they genuinely want what she offers, are not all simply performing wealth. Some of them are doing something stranger, trying to find a way to feel something in a universe that has, in many ways, been stripped of the contexts in which feeling things used to come naturally. Earth gave humanity a home, a fixed point, a gravitational and emotional center around which everything else was organized. The settled systems, for all their achievements, have not replaced this. New Atlantis is impressive and genuinely cosmopolitan, but it is not home in the way Earth was home. Not for a species that spent its entire evolutionary history on one specific world. The diversity of the settled systems, its many planets, its competing factions, its multiple incompatible visions of what civilization should look like, is, in important ways, the structural opposite of the settled belonging that a single homeworld once provided. In this context, the Siren's controlled and curated world might be understood as an attempt, expensive and philosophically confused, but not entirely dishonest, to recreate the experience of a fixed point, a place where the parameters are known, where the environment is stable and beautiful, where the question of what it means to be home, which the settled systems cannot fully answer, is temporarily replaced by the simpler question of what it means to be comfortable. And here, the comparison with what Constellation represents becomes genuinely interesting. The impulse that organizes Constellation's membership, the drive that sends people toward the unknown in search not of comfort, but of meaning, is in some sense the opposite of what the Siren offers. Constellation's explorers move toward uncertainty. They find value in the discomfort of the genuinely new, in the risk of the unreached. The Siren's passengers and Constellation's explorers are, in one reading, doing the same thing, moving through the universe, trying to find something worth finding. But they have drawn opposite conclusions about what the search requires. One tradition says, remove all friction and the beauty will emerge. The other says, move toward the friction, and that is where meaning lives. Neither tradition is entirely right. Neither is entirely wrong. But the Siren, by existing in the form she does, by offering the most complete possible insulation from the universe while remaining within it, poses the question more starkly than any frontier outpost could. What are you looking for out here in the dark? And do you genuinely believe you will find it if you make yourself comfortable enough? The restlessness that produces the Siren is not categorically different from the restlessness that produces exploration and invention, and the slow, difficult construction of institutions meant to outlast the people who built them. It is the same refusal of stasis, the same conviction that what exists is not sufficient, the same inability to accept the world as a ceiling rather than a floor. It expresses differently, often destructively, in terms of what it costs others. But it is recognizably the same underlying thing, humanity at the edge of the map, looking further, wanting more, unable to stop. Come back to the beginning. Come back to the image of a ship moving through the dark, a small, lit vessel carrying its cargo of comfort and complexity through a universe that has no stake in what that cargo contains. We began with a paradox that a species which lost its homeworld kept building luxury, kept insisting on the grammar of hierarchy, even as it was rebuilding civilization across a dozen new worlds. The paradox felt at the outset like an accusation, like evidence of something broken and perhaps unfixable at the core of what we are. Perhaps the more careful reading is different. Perhaps the existence of the Siren of the Stars is not evidence that humanity failed to learn from catastrophe. It may be evidence of something stranger and harder to categorize, a species so fundamentally oriented toward more, toward the next level, the next achievement, the next refinement of what it already has, that even the destruction of its homeworld could not interrupt the momentum for more than a generation. This could be a tragedy, a species that cannot learn, cannot simplify, cannot recognize in even the most overwhelming loss a reason to ask whether less might sometimes be enough, whether the things we chase say more about us than we are comfortable admitting. Or it could be something else. The same energy that drove the development of the Grav Drive, that founded New Atlantis, that built the colony settlements on worlds that had no reason to welcome human presence. This energy and the impulse that produced the Siren of the Stars are not categorically separate. The restlessness is the same. The refusal of stasis is the same. What differs is the direction it has been pointed and the cost it extracts from others in the pointing. What Trident Luxury Lines has built, what the Siren of the Stars represents in the larger story of what humanity has made of the stars, is a monument to a particular refusal. The refusal to be satisfied, the refusal to accept that what exists is enough, that the level you occupy is the level you should stay at, that the universe as you find it constitutes a ceiling rather than a floor. For the Siren's passengers, this refusal expresses as consumption, and display. For the explorers and colonists who built the rest of the settled systems, it expresses differently, as the drive toward the unknown. But it is recognizably the same species producing both. The uncomfortable truth the Siren carries in her hull, heavier than any cargo, is this: that the quality of consciousness that allowed humanity to survive the end of its world is the same quality of consciousness that immediately began looking for ways to climb above the people surviving alongside it. The same thing that saved us is what we are still working out how to live with. The Siren will keep sailing. She will keep offering her managed miracle, the universe made safe to look at. The void converted into a backdrop, the existential weight of life at the edge of human expansion replaced for the duration of a voyage by the lighter and more manageable question of whether the dessert was worth the calories. And somewhere below her polished surface, the world will keep doing what the world does. Complex, contested, not fully legible from any vantage point, including the observation deck of a luxury liner moving at speed between the stars. The question we started with, why humanity still chases status at the end of the world, was never really about wealth or class or the economics of luxury. It was about what humanity is when it is not under sufficient pressure to be anything in particular. What we reveal when we have the freedom and the resources to reveal it. The answer, apparently, is this: we build a beautiful ship. We sail it through the dark. We argue about the seating chart. And somehow, in the arguing and the sailing and the building, we mean something by it, something we do not quite have the language for yet, and may not find before we reach whatever is waiting at the edge of the map. The stars, as always, do not answer. They just remember.